All right, the introduction. On May 2nd, 2022, the governor of Virginia offered a sincere apology for his state's participation in eugenics. In an effort to improve the genetic quality of its population, Virginia forcibly sterilized at least 7,450 unfit, quote, people between 1927 and 1979. More than any other state but California. Quote, the eugenics movement was a shameful effort in which state government never should have been involved, and it is now, the governor declared. And we must remember the Commonwealth's past mistakes in order to prevent them from reoccurring, which we aren't doing. And Virginia's apology came on the 75th anniversary of the United States Supreme Court ruling in Buck versus Bell. In that dark legal landmark, the court upheld eugenic sterilization and allowed the state to sterilize Carrie Buck, a young woman wrongly labeled feeble-minded. The court that decided Buck versus Bell included some of the most distinguished men in the annals of American law. The Chief Justice was William Howard Taft, who had served as president before ascending to the bench. Louis Brandeis, the towering progressive who had made his name as the People's Attorney, signed on to the majority opinion, as did Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., widely considered to be one of the greatest legal minds, if not the greatest legal mind, in American history. It was the legendary Oliver Wendell Holmes that wrote the 1927 ruling that he included in it one of the most brutal aphorisms in American jurisprudence. Holmes, the Harvard-educated scion of several of Boston's most distinguished families, was scornful of the poorly educated Carrie and her working-class mother, based on scant information about the two Buck women and about Carrie's daughter, who was a small child at the time. He famously declared, quote, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Holmes' opinion, for an 8-1 majority, did not merely uphold Virginia's sterilization law. It delivered a clarion call to Americans to identify those among them who should not be allowed to reproduce and to sterilize them in large numbers. The nation must sterilize those who sap the strength of the state, Holmes insisted, end quote, to prevent our being swamped from incompetence, end quote. In words that could have been torn from the pages of a eugenics tract, he declared, quote, it is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or to let them starve for their imbecility, society must prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. The United States in the 1920s was caught up in the mania, the drive to use newly discovered scientific laws of heredity to perfect humanity. Modern eugenics, which had emerged in England among followers of Charles Darwin, who had crossed the Atlantic and became a full-fledged intellectual craze. The United States suddenly had a new enemy, bad germplasm, and those who carried it, the unfit. The eugenicists warned, threatened to bring down not only the nation, but the whole human race, which obviously they didn't care about the whole human race. Like, they were literally just trying to be like, you know, like how people are when they say they hate everybody. They don't actually want to fix everybody. They just want their specific kind at the time, I'm assuming, you know. Anyways, America's leading citizen led the charge to save humanity. John D. Rockefeller Jr., the world's wealthiest man, funded scientific research into what he called the defective human could be bred out of the population. Alexander Graham Bell became chairman of the board of scientific directors of the Eugenics Record Office in Cold Spring Harbor. Hold on. Cold Spring Harbor in New York, the leading organization advocating eugenic sterilization. And former President Theodore Roosevelt took the pages of the national magazine to insist that the unfit must be forbidden to leave offspring behind them. Prominent scientists formed organizations to research and promote eugenics with names like the Committee to Study and to Report on the Best Practical Means of Cutting Off the Defective Germplasm in the American Population. Social reformers embraced biology as the fastest route to their goal of a better world. Some spoke gently of the need for laws to prevent the unfit from passing on their defects. Others were more severe, like the upper-class New York advocate for the mentally ill, who warned her fellow philanthropists that they put society at risk when their well-meaning charity helped men and women who are diseased and vicious to reproduce their kind. That was a quote, by the way, the men and women who are diseased part. In big cities and small towns, hereditary improvement was the intellectual issue of the day. Edward Wigham, a popular lecture traveler, traveled the country promoting the new Decalogue of Science, an updated version of the Ten Commandments based on eugenic principles. Women's clubs filled their agendas with lectures and identifying the hereditary defective and arranging eugenic marriages. Clergymen competed in national eugenics sermon contests organized on topics like religion and eugenics. Does the church have any responsibility for improving the human stock? End quote, by the way. Eugenics permeated the popular culture. Best-selling books explain the concept of race betterment to an eager public. The mass-market magazines urged their readers to do their part to breed superior human beings. The wonderful message of the new heredity, Cosmopolitan explained, that it had offered the promise of preventing once and for all the birth of the diseased or crippled or depraved. Hollywood released a feature-length horror movie which filled theaters from coast to coast, showing the frightening consequences of the consequences of allowing babies with defects to be born. Conferences and public events were held to promote eugenics research and education. New York's American Museum of Natural History hosted the Second International Eugenics Congress, and the U.S. State Department sent out the invitations. I think that's